All right, welcome to our first video lecture for 3D art and animation. For our first lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about Blender and some of the key components that you guys are going to be working with, and maybe break down the Blender view a little bit so that we don't have to be so overwhelmed by all of the tool options available to us. As with the future videos in this course, there's going to be a lecture posted on eBackpack that has some PowerPoint notes and keywords to help you follow along. So if I mention keywords in here that don't make sense, or if I go through them quickly and you want a more step-by-step approach to some of the vocabulary, all of the vocab that I cover today is going to be in the PowerPoint. So when we open Blender, Blender is going to be the major tool that we use for this course. It's a very powerful tool. It allows us to do a lot with 3D art and animation, but because it's a powerful tool, there is a lot going on. So there's a lot of stuff in Blender in various places that can be kind of confusing and overwhelming. And we're going to break a little bit of that down today. So whenever you first open Blender, you get this little window that prompts you to open a project you've already done. For most of you, if not all of you, this window should be empty. So where it says recent right here, you won't have any files that you can see. I've obviously made some files on here before, so it's prompting me to open any of my previous Blender files. We're going to go ahead and click out of that so that we can see what a new Blender project looks like. Whenever we create a new Blender project, Blender wants us to start with a cube. In some ways, Blender is trying to be helpful by putting something in the scene, but very rarely will we ever actually use this cube. Most of the time, we're going to delete this cube and make something new. However, today we're not going to talk about that. Today we're going to talk about all these other pieces that you see around the Blender interface. Now, right now, this may look kind of tiny. When I talk about some of these specific pieces, I'm going to zoom in. So if you can't see them very well right now, bear with me. If you're watching this video at home, you should have a zoom tool on your desktop that'll let you zoom into the video if there's anything you can't see. Blender has a lot of buttons and functionality. And as a matter of fact, if we hop over to the PowerPoint really quick, I want to show you guys an example of all the things that we find in the Blender window. So right here we can see, this is a smaller screenshot that I took of Blender itself. We can see that all of these different things in Blender have a name. The goal of this video is to break down these names and to give you an interactive look at what each of these windows do. So with that, I'm using a couple of vocab terms that we really need to define here. I'm talking about windows and interfaces. An interface is the entire Blender program. So everything here we would consider Blender's interface. Now, some of you may think of a window as being a whole program, like when we open a new window in our browser or something like that, it opens an entire new space. When we talk about windows in Blender, windows are these little subcategories. So everywhere that the interface is divided into smaller parts, we would consider that a window. So this guy is a window. This section here, these are both windows. We've got actually even got one very long and narrow window down at the bottom. For your homework, you need to learn the names of some of these windows. It might be a good idea while you're watching the rest of this video to make some notes as I'm talking because these names won't be popping up on the screen, or you can go and follow along in the PowerPoint if you'd like a visual of what some of the vocab and some of the window names are. So I'm going to start with this big open space. We call this open space the 3D view, or the 3D view window. This is where the magic happens. This is where we show and build our sculpture, our scene, our animation. Everything happens here. As you can see right now, our animation only contains a single cube. And if we were to render this animation, or if we were to create an image, all we would see is a single cube. A couple other important pieces. Here we have a camera. This represents the angle at which we see the cube. And then we also have a lamp. A lamp provides light for our scene. Just to show you what that would look like real quick, this is what, from the camera's perspective, this is what our cube looks like. And we're going to learn about rendering a little bit later. But for right now, we just need to understand that anything we put in this 3D view represents what we're going to see in our final image or animation. And all these little pieces, the cube, the lamp, the camera, we call these components. So we have the 3D view, and then inside the 3D view, we have the 3D view's components. And again, all of that is outlined in the PowerPoint. So if you forget any of the vocab, or if you miss one, double check the PowerPoint for what this looks like. The big reason that I wanted to show you in video form what these windows are is because we're going to change some of them. So we have the 3D view. The other views in this class that we care about are the outliner window. So in the top right, this guy right here where my mouse is, and actually I'm going to zoom in on this so we can see exactly what it is I'm talking about. This guy is called the outliner window. And the reason we call it the outliner window, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit closer to the edge. The reason we call it the outliner window is because the outliner window is responsible for showing us an outline of everything that is in the scene. So right now, our 3D view contains a camera, a cube, and a lamp. And you can sort of see, while I'm zoomed in here, that if I click on the lamp lights up, and if I click on the cube lights up. So if we had a large amount of objects in our scene over here, then we could use the outliner window to find them quickly. So if I had, 13 cubes and 6 spheres and a whole bunch of other stuff, sometimes the outliner window is an easier way to find things than trying to find them in the 3D view itself. So far we have the 3D view, the outliner window. Let's move just below the outliner window to what we call the properties window. The properties window is this entire section here. And again, it may seem like there's a lot going on, but in the properties window, there's really, for this class, only a few things that we care about. As we move through an introduction to 3D art and animation, it's going to be crucial for us to only focus on the parts that we care about and for us to ignore the parts of Blender we don't need. There are plenty of features in Blender that we will never get to, and as basic 3D animators, we will never need. For example, all of this stuff that you see right here, we won't need this for the first half of the class at least, so you can ignore all of it. In the properties window, the thing we really care about are these buttons up here. You're going to hear me refer to this a lot as the button bar, surprisingly. And the button bar, if I zoom in slightly, contains several different windows that are meant to open different properties. So for example, I have that cube clicked on right now. If I click this little button that looks like a cube, I learn all of the properties that have to do with that cube. There are also buttons for materials, textures, extra properties that we can add on top of the cube. And as I said before, at the beginning of class, we don't care about what all of these buttons do. We just need to know that they're there. So when I say, oh, look on the button bar for the cube, you know that the button bar is what we're talking about. This is the button bar. The button bar is also always found in the properties window. So if something in your interface changes or if you get lost, look for the button bar. The button bar will at least tell you where the properties window is, and then from there you can figure out what else is going on. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that in a second. In a minute, we're going to change all of these window locations, and you're going to use the button bar to figure out exactly where the properties window is. Okay. This window on the left is called the Tools window. Sometimes this might be hidden on you. So we've got 3D view, outliner, properties with our button bar, and tools. The reason this is called the Tools window, or the Tools toolbar, is because it has all the things that we can do to our cube. If we look over here on the left, We have some options like translate, rotate, scale, mirror. We're going to be using these a lot in this class, but you don't have to worry so much about them today. Just as an example, though, if I have the cube selected and I click rotate, you notice that when I move my mouse, the cube also moves. So these tools are all about manipulating objects in the 3D. And we're going to get to most of these as the class goes on. In fact, if there's two windows that you really want to remember and think of as being important, note this down right now because you guys are going to be using these windows a lot. The Tools window and the Properties window with the button bar, those are probably the two most important windows you're going to need in this class, especially in the beginning. So always keep an eye on your left and right sides. The last window that we care about, and we're not going to use it for a while, but we will need it, is called the timeline. So the timeline is down here at the bottom, and this is used once we start making animations. You can see I have some video player functions down here. I have play, I have rewind, I have skip to the beginning. If I do play, you can see my little timeline moves. So the timeline is meant to allow us to play an animation once we create one. Now my cube isn't animated right now, so there is no animation to watch. But once I start adding animations, I'm going to be using this timeline to figure out where the cube is going to move and when. So just a quick recap, we have the 3D view, the outliner, the properties window with the button bar, the tools window, and the timeline window. And again, if you need a refresher on that, check out the PowerPoint. All of those windows are labeled here. So, why learn all the names of these windows? If all you need to remember are a few buttons, why do we care about what the windows are called? We care because Blender's interface can change. And this can be a really intimidating feature for new users of Blender because suddenly you'll be working and your whole window layout will be different. Up here, I want to draw your attention to this upper section of the toolbar. We have some normal functions up here like help and file and stuff that you might see if you were working in Microsoft Word or a normal word processor or any other editor on your computer. But what I want to show you guys is this little drop down that says default. Default is the layout that you see here. This is the default layout in Blender. If I click the little drop down next to default, it gives me a whole bunch of layouts that I can choose to use. For example, one of those is animation. If I run the animation view, suddenly my layout has changed. For example, my tool window is gone and it's replaced by stuff that we have never seen before. And there are windows in Blender that we have never seen and we will not get to. So keep in mind that when you change to a different view, there may be stuff you just don't know about, and that is okay. There are a lot of features in Blender that we're not going to cover. However, after we've taken a moment to recover from the fact that our view has completely changed, we can start to recognize that some views have actually stayed the same. For example, this view and these two views should look very familiar to you. Even though this one's been expanded a little bit and they've added some stuff up here, 3 of these views should be, right away, readily apparent. Now, I'm not going to tell you what these views are because your homework is being able to identify windows in different layouts, but I will give you a hint. Remember the first thing I told you to look for. When your layout changes, look for the button bar. And here's the button bar. So what you want to keep in mind is, what does that mean this window is? If the button bar is here, then what must this window be? One freebie that I will tell you is take a look down here. We've got our play button. We've got our pause, our rewind. So this must be our timeline. So we found our timeline. We found some other windows that look familiar. Now sometimes it'll be completely off. If I go to UV editing, holy cow, where did all my stuff go? UV editing is a very specific layout. We in this class are never going to use UV editing, and it looks like most of our windows are gone. But if I look carefully, I can find two windows that I recognize. Taking a look right here, we've got our tools back, translate, rotate, scale. So this guy must be our tools window. And then here is my cube and my camera and my lamp. So this window must be my 3D. Now if I change this back to default, I'm back to where I am. So one thing that hopefully you're always able to do, if you end up in an area that you don't recognize with a layout that looks completely different that you can't work with, remember that you can always go back here and change your settings to default. Now, sometimes we want to change individual windows, and that's the last thing that I'm going to show you guys on this section before we're done. Well, the second to last thing. There's one more thing we want to take a look at, but this is the big thing that we care about. The layout in Blender is 100% customizable. In each of these windows, you should be able to find a little set of double arrows. Let me see if I can zoom in on this so that you guys can see it better. You'll find a little switch that has double arrows. See that there? The double arrows indicates a window that can be changed. So, if I click on, let's say, oh, I don't know. Let's take a look at our outliner. If I click on the outliner, I can change the outliner to any of these windows. For example, let's say I wanted a second timeline. Well, now you can see that up here, I've got something that looks a lot like this. So I've created a second timeline, but I don't like that, so I'm going to change it to a 3D view. Now look at that. I've got another copy. It's a different angle, but I've got another copy of this scene. So I'm using my 3D view here. I can use my 3D view up here. And if I move this guy around, you can see that it moves in my 3D view. So what I've effectively done is created a second window to work in, a second 3D window. Now I want to keep this as outliner, so I'm going to switch it back. So keep in mind, if something doesn't look right, it may have been that the window was accidentally changed, and you may need to change it back. If I wanted a second properties window, maybe I would go down here. Here's our double arrows. Oh, get out of here, Windows. Here's our double arrows, so I know that I can change this. I'm going to change it to properties. And now it's a very smushed version of what I see over here. You can see down here we have a button bar, and over here we have a button bar. So I've created a separate properties window. Remember, the button bar, important tip to keep in mind, the button bar always is found in the properties window. So if I change this from properties to outliner, no more button bar. If I change it back to properties, we've got our button bar again. So always keep an eye on that one. Okay. If you have any questions about the vocab, or if you've already forgotten any of these window names, please check out the PowerPoint that goes with this video. That'll let you give you a visual clue of all of the window names and their locations. It'll also be really helpful for your homework. Okay. The last thing I want to show you guys is how to change our input. If you've been playing with Blender at home, something you may have realized is that to be able to click anything in the 3D view, you have to right-click instead of left-click. If you're on a Mac, this can be really annoying because a lot of times by default, a Mac does not allow you to right-click. It doesn't have a second mouse button. Now, there's ways in Mac to set this up so that you can use a right-click, but if you don't feel like doing that, if you'd just rather left-click everything, we have a way to fix this. So I've gone up here in the upper left, and I've gone to File. Now, if you want to take a break here, this may be a good time to pause, check your notes, and get caught up. We're all done talking about Windows, and we're going to move on to talking about how to set up some user settings. Maybe in the future I'll break this into 2 videos, but for now, I think we'll keep it as one. So pause, take a break here, and then come back when you're ready to start about user preferences. I would make a new section in my notes called user settings or user preferences. All right, so we've got our little file window up here. I'm going to zoom in again so that we can see it a little bit better. And we've got the usual thing that you might see in Microsoft Word. We've got new, open, open recent, all this fun stuff, save, save as. Then we've got this thing called user preferences. I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to zoom out. User preferences has a whole bunch of settings that we can basically use to change everything about Blender. For example, if we go to input, up here on the top, see right here that I've got input highlighted. If we go to input, Blender shows us all of the keyboard shortcuts for everything you could ever want to do. So if I want to, let's see, in the 3D view, if I want to select all or deselect all, I can press the A key. And that's my shortcut. I can also change any of the shortcuts here. I would not recommend doing that because as I teach you shortcuts in class, they're going to be the shortcuts that are set by default. So if you change something and you don't remember that you've changed it, then my shortcuts may not make sense. You can see we've got rename item, left mouse, activate item, all kinds of fun stuff. The part that's important is this part on the left that says select with. Select with is talking about which type of click we use to select objects. It's always set for right click by default. If I change this to left click, now I should be able to just use a regular left click to select anything in my 3D view. And before I exit out of here, I'm going to click Save User Settings so that I'm sure that these settings are going to stick. And then I'm going to close the User Settings window. Now, you guys obviously can't see it, so we see what my hand is doing, but trust me that I am now left-clicking instead of right-clicking, and it should work for you well. I hope that you've had a chance to install Blender at home on either your PC or your Mac, or for some of you, maybe even a Linux machine. And I hope that you've had an opportunity to play with it. Now, hopefully this makes more sense. Some of these windows might seem less intimidating, and I promise that as we go through the class, more and more of these windows will make more sense. And you're going to learn how to ignore the stuff you don't need and to only focus on the parts of Blender that we care about. All right. Don't forget to work on your homework assignment. Hopefully this helps demystify some of the confusion that goes along with Blender. Until next time.